Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello, I'm Larry Wiest. Welcome to Veterans Roundtable, a program for and about this community's veterans and a program of interest to the community. To my right, the viewer's left, is Robert Allyn, a fellow Vietnam veteran and former director of the New York State Vietnam Memorial and Gallery. Our guest in this inaugural program is yet another Vietnam veteran, retired Colonel Charley Johnson, U.S. Army. Welcome to the show, Charley.
Larry, thank you very much. It's certainly a pleasure to be here. I feel extremely honored in that I happen to be on your inaugural show. Well, and I hope that we set a good pattern this afternoon and you can keep it rolling, pal. Thank you very much for doing this. I think it's a tremendous contribution you're making to the community.
Thank you. Bobby, you want to start things off by probing into Charley's background for us?
Well, Colonel, we can tell from your accent that you're not from around Albany or Troy. Where did you come from? Where were you born?
Well, Bob, I thought I'd use that as an introduction that you could tell by my accent that I wasn't born and raised in the upper regions of the Hudson Valley. No, I'm born and raised in a little country town in Bruce, Mississippi, where two things happen, night and day, and it hasn't changed a great deal since I drove about 50 miles with my mother and my grandmama to get on the train to go to college here in the East. It's an interesting town. I might spend a few minutes with it, if I might be, to tell you a little bit about it because it really is most importantly part of my life and how what I am and where I came from made a great impression on what I decided to do in my life. My father was from that particular part of the country, as was my mom. At a very early age, my dad had gone to college for a year in a business school and had gotten a job in Memphis, Tennessee with E.L. Bruce Company, which was the largest hardwood manufacturing company in the United States. And at that particular point in time, this is in the 20s, there was a large stand of hardwood in North Mississippi. And so the company sent my dad down to a little crossroads in Calhoun County and says we need to build a sawmill here. And so he and the mill surveyor laid out to town, and they built the world's largest sawmill at that time. And in subsequent years cut all the hardwood, by the way, but the mill is still there. But I live, my dad and the surveyor laid out to town. I lived on the corner of Johnson and Murphy Street. Murphy was my grandmother's name. And in the late 20s, the town was incorporated. So it's basically a young town here as far as towns go in our great country. And my mom had a college education and had taught school for a couple years when she and my dad were married. Early on, after I was born, I lost my dad very tragically, and my mom became a very, very young widow. And in the parlance of the South, she became a real steel magnolia. And she was my hero.
And this was all the time in Bruce?
All the time in Bruce, Mississippi. I still haven't gotten out of Bruce yet, pal. But my mom went back to teaching school and decided to stay in Bruce, Mississippi. And when I left Bruce, Mississippi, the greatest thing I could see in the rearview mirror was Bruce, Mississippi. But I look back today and realize what a marvelous, marvelous opportunity it was for me to grow up in this little country town.
Okay, and then you went to high school where?
Well, I did not go to high school in Bruce. There was Bruce had a consolidated high school at the time it was called, and kids from all over the county came to school there. In those days, the Mississippi school was 8 months a year. The first 2 months, you only went a half day because everybody went home to pick cotton. And my mom realized that I needed a little better education. Perhaps I was going to get at Bruce High School. So at tremendous sacrifices, and to this day, I don't know how she did it, but I attended a small prep school down in Gulfport, Mississippi, Gulf Coast Military Academy. So I went to school there for 4 years. Not too far from New Orleans, I might add, greatly influenced by that beautiful city.
Okay, is that where you got interested in the military when you were there?
Well, yes and no. I think I became more interested there because I was introduced formally to what military organization is. I a little skinny boy from country town, and loved it. As I say, it was a tremendous opportunity for me to go. First of all, it was a very fine education. It was a small school. And I might add that it closed the year after I graduated. I'm not really sure if that had anything to do with it or not. But there was a junior ROTC program, and regular Army officers were assigned to the detachment there with a couple of NCOs. And I just admired those gentlemen so very, very much. And we had a military organization. My junior year, I was a first sergeant of my company. And in my senior year, I was we called it the battalion commander, but it was like the first captain of the senior cadet. And that's where I began to understand the power sometime of leadership and certainly the responsibilities there.
All right, and if you can give us some sense of where Bruce is in relation to some other part of Mississippi, major part of Mississippi.
Well, it's in the north central part, Larry. It's only about, it's still the reason it was established there, it was out in the middle of the woods. It was the mill company put it there because A, the lumber that was available, but then because they could bring a spur of a railroad over to it. We're in the north central part of the state, about 30 miles south of Oxford, Mississippi, where the University of Mississippi. And I always say it's William Faulkner country. Okay. And if you happen to be a fan of William Faulkner literature, that's the kind of place it is. It's a tough country. I had an easy time where I went to college because I was born and raised in Bruce, Mississippi.
How'd you find your way to upstate New York, more specifically a place called the United States Military Academy at West Point?
Well, it kind of goes back to Bruce also. There was a great gentleman from the class of 1898 named Fox Connor, who retired Major General, who was from Calhoun County, which is south of Bruce, and his hometown was even more country than mine. And my mom could remember Fox Connor coming home at times, and he always went to church. He always wore his dress blues, and my mom could remember Fox Connor in dress blues. And that was her only understanding of what being in the military establishment was. But anyway, I used to think that it was my idea to go to West Point, but I look back now in my age and wisdom and realize that my mom pretty much had planted that idea in my mind at a very early age. And of course, she was impressed by Fox Connor, but she was also very impressed by the tuition, I think, because as you know,
tuition's great.
It doesn't take a whole heck of a lot of your cash to get to West Point. But anyway, out of back to Gulf Coast Military Academy, again, I seemed like always when people were talking about where we're going to go to college, my goal was always, I'm going to go to West Point. And if I knew, and at that time had been so aware of how many landmines and booby traps and what the competition is to get into West Point, I'm not sure I'd have been so cocky and so assured that I was going to go. But
you have to have the grades to get into West Point.
Well, you had to have pretty good grades, and then of course the three areas in which candidates are tested are in academics and also physical fitness, called aptitude, a physical aptitude test. And then the last one, it was not quite as formal in my days to get in, but today the admissions board at West Point looks for leadership indicators and participation in sports, captains of teams, participation in bands, participation in publications, and of course I had a great point getter in that I'd been the battalion commander.
I was going to say that probably didn't hurt.
Gulf Coast Military Academy. I had a few other boards, and I was always participating in sports, and I had done fairly well for a long, skinny guy. Probably have more chips in my teeth than I really should have because I tried to participate in sports that I shouldn't be participating in. But that helped. I got, when in my day we took something called the West Point Aptitude Test, which is the forerunner of the SAT. And now today when I look at the SAT, I realize that we were taking the test that was produced in those days by Princeton University, but that's where we get our SATs today too.
So you arrived at West Point, what, sometime around 1950?
In the early 50s, yes, sir.
And had the Korean War broken out at the time you arrived there?
The Korean War had just begun. And we were very, very aware during my tenure as a cadet of the Korean War. Of course, it had ended by the time I had graduated. Yeah, but we had many of our tactical officers who would come young combat arms and combat experienced officers who came to us from their duties and experiences in Korea at the time.
Okay. And of course, back then there were no females at West Point, right?
No, sir. The first graduating class of females was 1980. No, 81.
And I believe that anybody graduating from West Point graduated back then anyway with the same degree.
That's correct. Our degree was called a Bachelor of Science degree, and it was heavily oriented in math and engineering, but it was a very, very good basic degree, Larry. I have classmates who are nuclear physicists. I have classmates who are very accomplished surgeons. I have classmates who are dentists. I have classmates who were lawyers. And it was an easy platform to go into other areas and for graduate degrees, which I subsequently have a couple of graduate degrees and found it not too difficult.
And I understand that most classes had a Rhodes Scholar or two.
That's correct. In my class, I have 3 Rhodes Scholars. But back to West Point in the academic portion, I did not particularly excel in academics at the United States Military Academy. Like maybe I was down toward the bottom of the class with some difficulties encountered during my time there. At West Point, you are pretty much tested in 3 areas, and that's leadership, and physical fitness, and academics. During my time as a cadet, I was always very, very high in the leadership side, and on the PE side, did extremely well. I was not a varsity athlete. I tried a couple of sports, but did not make it. But I did very well in the intramural program. As a plebe, I won the Brigade Open Boxing Championship, which plebes never did.
Oh, what weight?
155.
And how tall were you back then?
I was about 6'1", and weighed about 155 pounds.
You had a good long reach,
and I could jab and move, and that was long arms, that was it. But I had boxed in high school, so I had some boxing experience. Okay. And in my senior year, I won the Brigade Open Championship in wrestling. So
there you had leverage.
Yes, I had a little leverage and a few more pounds, I might add.
Now, we mentioned, or you mentioned before, William Faulkner. I understand that he was sort of partial to West Point and would come up there periodically to lecture. Is that true?
That's very true. It did not occur during my time as a cadet, but in subsequent years, there was a gentleman in the class of '51 named Joe Fant from Columbus, Mississippi, who roomed with a gentleman at West Point who subsequently married William Faulkner's daughter. And there was a close relationship, and William Faulkner did come to West Point several times. And the last public appearance of William Faulkner before he died was a visit to West Point. And in the library at West Point, there's a William Faulkner room in which his wife, after Faulkner died, shortly after that visit, donated to West Point the umbrella and the black Homburg that Faulkner wore that particular visit, wow. And some of the books that he had right there.
Now, when it came time to graduate, you were given perhaps a choice of which branch of service, which branch in the Army actually you wanted to go in, or were you not given that choice?
Well, yes, you were given a choice to a certain extent, and the choices were made predicated on your academic standing, not your leadership, not your physical fitness, but your academic standing.
Would you tell the viewers, please, what combat branches existed back then that a typical cadet might go into?
In those days, 25% of all the classes at the Naval Academy and Army went into the Air Force because the Air Force Academy was not developed at that time. But within the Army, we could only go into what we know in those days as the combat arms branches. That's armored, infantry, artillery, engineers, signal corps, and certain branches of the signal corps. And that was about it. And each branch had a percentage of a class. And so in those days, all the first classmen or seniors were together in an auditorium, and there would be a big blackboard with the number of people going to infantry, the number of people could go into the artillery, and then your name would start begun to be called off. Number one man in the class, he stood up and he said what branch he wanted to. So
probably Corps of Engineers.
In those days it was. So the Corps of Engineers blackboard would be erased and one number less. And then toward the end of the day, when most of the people had left, when you got down to Mr. Johnson, you stood up and he says, infantry by choice, sir, although it wasn't a hell of a lot of choice there. It was about the only blackboard left. But I'm very proud of it. I wanted to go in the infantry, so I was an infantry officer. And when I Received my diploma. There weren't many people behind me, and I shook hands with a gentleman from the class of 1915 who was celebrating his 40th anniversary, and it was the President of the United States, and I was Dwight D. Eisenhower.
How about that?
And he asked me, he said, "You're going into the infantry?" And I said, "Yes, sir."
And when you went into West Point, the president, I guess, was Harry Truman.
That's correct.
Well, now, when you got out, I understand you're afforded, you have to go to some military schools, Army schools, airborne and Ranger and the like, either one or both. If I'm correct, where did you go?
That's correct. Each of the branches in those days, there was one particular post in the United States that was a home of that branch. For instance, the artillery home was Fort Sill, Oklahoma. The engineers in those days was Fort Belvoir, Virginia. The infantry, as one of the largest posts in the United States, was it still is, at Fort Benning, Georgia. So you go to a basic class, and essentially it's you're learning really kind of how to be a soldier, because although you've attended a military college for a number of years and you've had summer training, you got to remember West Point is a college to start with, and you learn a lot of things other than the normal curriculum at a civilian college. But being a soldier, being in the Army, leading troops, you still needed that basic instruction, and that's what we got at Fort Benning. And after the basic course, I went to jump school to learn how to be a paratrooper.
How long was that?
That was about, heavens, if I remember, 3 or 4 weeks at the time. You took a basic course where you got 5 jumps, and then if you requested it, you could go on to jump master school, which was about 3 more jumps. And at the time, I was hoping I could be assigned to an airborne unit, but I was not. But subsequently, I did spent most of the rest of my career in airborne units. But then from there, I went to Ranger School. The Ranger School in those days was a couple of months, and we're very proudly wear my Ranger tab. At that particular point in time, the Army did not have Ranger units per se, so it was just a very advanced type of small unit tactics and training. Very physical, 3 phases. You started out at Fort Benning, then you went down to Florida for the jungle phase, and from there you went up to Dahlonega, Georgia for the mountain phase. Okay. Tremendous course. It's grown greatly since those days, and today many cadets take off their summer, instead of going on summer leave, they opt to go to Ranger School. And my son,
wow,
we may want to talk about later, did that when he was a cadet.
I hear that might be the toughest school the Army has. I
would say hands down. It was in those days, my days, and from what I've seen and understand today, it is.
What type of aircraft were you using to jump out of back then?
Bobby, sometime when I think of so long ago, it was one of the Wright brothers built. But it was a little different. It was the C-1, that's right, you're an old Air Force man. It was a C-119 it was the old kind of boxcar type that you could take the end of it off and could go out the rear or put the cone back on. You could use the side doors. And so all the jump training in those days was with C-119. Okay. Subsequently on airborne units to which I was assigned, through the years, it was basically the C-130.
Right. And up to this point, how many jumps had you made?
Well, to get through the basic course was 5, and then the jump master course was only 3. And then you have the ratings. That's the basic airborne wings, and then a number of other jumps and necessary types of jumps and training. You can get a star over your wings, and then the next one is a wreath called the master blaster. A master parachutist, and by the time I was, I will say a halfway senior captain, I was a master paratrooper, and then I spent quite a number of a lot of time in and around the 82nd Airborne Division. So I very proudly wear in my lapel, which you may have seen sometime, a gold jump wing with the 82nd Airborne insignia at the back, and they're called the Centurion wings, and that's 100 jumps with the 82nd.
Wow. It's incredible.
It means I landed on my head many times and limp sometime at happy hour.
Well, if we have time later in this program, we might ask you about any close calls that you might have had.
Okay, so from that point, when were you, when were you sent to Vietnam?
Well, I had quickly, my first assignment was a unit out at Fort Lewis, Washington, an infantry regiment. I had was blessed with some great commanders and people from whom I had a chance to learn. I was a company commander at a very, very junior lieutenant, first lieutenant, and learned mostly from mistakes. But I was also privileged to have, as a platoon sergeant, when I was the Intelligence and Reconnaissance platoon leader, a Medal of Honor awardee from World War II.
Wow.
Sergeant Wilbur Ross, and he's still alive. I visit with him occasionally. He's late 80s now, and he's a splendid man. He's just a great guy, and I learned a lot from him. From there, I went to Germany for a while. I was in an airborne brigade.
What year was this?
Oh, let's see now. I'm up to late 50s by the time I got to Germany. Was there. I was detailed for a tour of duty for a short time of military intelligence in France. From there, I went to Germany and spent time in an airborne brigade there. I spent a very fascinating 1 year as an aide-de-camp for the airborne brigade commander, a brigadier general. Came back to Fort Benning, went to advanced infantry class. From there, I did some more advanced airborne training. Took the Pathfinder course, which I'm not even sure Pathfinder course is still around, but it was a very privileged course to get to attend. Just about everybody wore jump wings would like to go to the Pathfinder course. From there, I went to Fort Benning. I was in the 82nd Airborne Division. Had some great experiences there, company commander. And by now I'm up to 1963, and that's when I first went to Vietnam, 1963.
Now, before Bobby jumps into 63, you spent a little time, if I understand you correctly from previous conversations, down in Mississippi, right outside the University of Mississippi. Is that correct?
Well, that was as a company commander in 82nd Airborne Division, and I use those stories to make a point of which I am very, very proud, and that is the role the United States Army played in the civil rights movement in the early 60s. Not a lot has been written about it, and rightfully so. We were just doing our duty at the time, and because of the Posse Comitatus law, we could not enforce the law. As you know, we can't serve as a police force, but the United States Army played a very major role, and specifically as a company commander, when a gentleman tried to get into, an African-American gentleman tried to get into University of Mississippi, and every redneck in southeastern United States, and I love them all, they're my cousins and my uncles, and decided to come to Ole Miss and say, look, and to include the governor, Mr. Ross Barnett, says we don't want any of those black guys at the University of Mississippi.
And this would be Air Force veteran James Meredith.
James Meredith. And the President of the United States, Mr. Kennedy, decided that he would prove to Mr. Barnett that there was a Constitution, everybody had the right to live under it. So I hustled up 200 well-armed paratroopers. We loaded on airplanes. We landed at Columbus Air Force Base and then got to Oxford, and I was at that time about 28.5 miles from my hometown. And by then the federal marshals had lost total control. 2 people had been killed. The mobs were there. And you'd be surprised what the well-armed paratroopers with a bayonet on the end of their rifle can convince some people to get out of your way, and let's let things happen the way they should. I was very proud of that, and it was tough in many ways, but it was tough for my soldiers too. Yeah,
I mean, on that subject, there was one aspect of being deployed down there that upset you quite a bit, as I understand it. And would you tell the viewers what that was?
Well, not so much upset, but I think I use it as an example sometime when I try to explain to folks why people can have biases and prejudices instilled in their life and still live with them, although they know it's wrong, perhaps. And real quickly, as we'd been alerted today to move out, and things were frantic. We were moving, and people were getting out to trucks and what have you. And my first sergeant came to me, and he says, "Sir, Pogue wants to see you." Now, Pogue was an 18-year-old airborne trooper in my company from Kosciuszko, Mississippi. We pronounce it differently than you do up in this particular part of the country. And by the way, that's Oprah Winfrey's hometown. And Pogue knew I was from Mississippi. All my troops knew I was from Mississippi. 50% of my troops at the time were African American. Pogue was a white guy. His best friend in that company was a black soldier from Chicago. Anyway, first sergeant says, "Pogue wants to see you." I says, "Tell Pogue I'll talk to him later." First sergeant says, "Sir, talk to Pogue." Well, first sergeant talks to a young captain, you listen to the first sergeant. So Pogue walks in, salutes smartly, got tears rolling down his eyes. I said, "What's up, Pogue?" He says, "Sir, I ain't going." I said, "What do you mean you ain't going?" He said, "Sir, them's our folks. I ain't going down to fight our folks." And somewhere or another, the good Lord blessed me with a thought quickly there that I realized that this kid was, I would have stayed in jail. He would have been court-martialed for missing the movement. And I looked at Pogue and I said, Pogue, you're right. Them's our folks, but we ain't going, I used his, I said, we ain't going down to fight him. We're going down to help our folks. Now, you understand? Pogue looked at me for about, it must have been 10 seconds, but it seemed like an hour. He looked at me and said, sir, are you being honest with me? And I said, Pogue, have I ever lied to you? He said, no, sir. He saluted smartly and he went. And subsequently, I had a chance to talk to him a long time. But it's just an example of, there he was. He knew it was wrong. He knew it was wrong to, the segregation was occurring. His best friend was a new experience for him, was a black soldier, and he was willing to.
Well, what happened to the black troops in your company?
Well, that was a very sad, and I'm sorry, I sort of want to throw the Pogue story in there. I didn't ask you a question. A decision was made by, allegedly by the president, but I think the Attorney General did, that after that we were through from Ole Miss. We went down to Columbus Air Force Base. Football games were scheduled, but the next was a football game in Jackson, Mississippi, and anticipated some problems perhaps. We were alerted to go out and sit on the helicopters to go to Jackson, Mississippi, and we went for the briefing at night, and our regimental commander stood up and said, gentlemen, you are to segregate your troops and not take your black soldiers. And I raised my hand and said, sir, that's wrong. And everybody gasped, thought, there goes the captain running his damn career. Fortunately, Colonel Lexon looked at me and says, any other questions? But I had to go back and separate my troops. 50% of my soldiers were black. It was a terrible decision to make, and it was made by the Attorney General.
This is Robert Kennedy.
Yes, sir. Years later, many years later, my regimental commander was a two-star general, and reported he came into an organization of which I was a member of, down in Strike Command, and he'd been there about a day, and the secretary came in and says, General Lexon wants to see you. So I went down and saluted General Lexon, and he walked in. I was Lieutenant Colonel by then. He said, Charlie, let's talk about that night down at Columbus Air Force Base. I says, okay, sir, thank you for not relieving me. He says, let me tell you. He says, since I walked in that briefing, I'd just gotten off the telephone with Robert Kennedy, who told me to segregate the troops. I told him it was wrong. Robert Kennedy told me, Colonel, if you can't follow the President's orders, get your ass off the phone and get me a colonel that can. I said, well, sir, thank you for telling me if I can't segregate my troops, go find a captain that can, because I followed your orders. But it was a sad day. It was a terrible, it was wrong to start with, in so many ways. If you got another hour, we can talk about how it was.
Yeah. And you had to explain it, though.
I tried to,
yeah.
And how could he explain it?
Yeah.
The last thing a good commander wants to do is says, well, I was ordered to do that. You don't explain. I mean, that's a cop-out. Good commanders don't say that.
Don't say that.
Yeah. So I got off the subject.
No,
that's all right.
Well, that's fine. We're keeping it in order. So, again, back to Vietnam.
And after that, I went to Vietnam
Okay.
first time. 1963, before most people had even heard of the place. I was the first wave of primarily captains were sent to Vietnam by Mr. Kennedy to start trying to organize and advise the Vietnamese Army. A few months afterward, the second wave went, and I was in that second wave. And at that particular time, it was my first tour there, and I was assigned to the organization that was training the Vietnamese Rangers.
Okay. How were they to work with?
It was trying. It was challenging. I was fortunate in that the Vietnamese Ranger units per se had been organized on paper, but the companies, now a Ranger battalion consisted in those days of 4 Ranger companies, and the companies had been organized for about a year at that time with not a lot of training. But the way the Rangers have been recruited is that the Vietnamese Army Command had gone to other Vietnamese units, particularly airborne units, and recruited soldiers to join the Ranger Battalion. They were paid not an awful lot extra, but they were paid more, and the criteria was they had to be the outstanding soldiers in each unit. So they were good soldiers. They were volunteers, as opposed to so many of the Vietnamese soldiers with whom we came in contact in later years. And the soldiers with whom my colleagues were trying to train in that first wave, and many of my colleagues in that second wave, because I felt extremely fortunate that I was assigned to the Ranger Battalion. And what we did, initially, the Ranger companies were being held by the district chiefs as their bodyguards and as their whatever. And so we were involved with pulling those companies away from the district chiefs, bring them to a training center called Trung Lap, organizing a battalion, trying to teach the battalion commander how to command a battalion, and then training those people, starting out with small unit tactics at the squad level. And we had some very accessible aggressors at that time, and the VC was very active. And so every training exercise when you walked out the berm was a
live fire.
It was a live fire exercise.
Now, a tour of duty, typically 12 months. How many tours did you?
Well, if we define a tour, I spent a great deal of time. Most of that year would have been with the Rangers, putting them together, and then at that time a mission that was being conducted by a civilian organization with 3 initials. One of them is C and the last one is A. Had been running for a year or 2 in Southeast Asia. Actually been running for longer than that, if you knew all the ins and outs of it. And the Department of Defense decided that we needed to put that under the Department of Defense. And so an organization was put together. Initially, the name of it was Special Operations Group, called SOG. Subsequently, the name was changed to Studies and Observations Group. I don't know whom we thought we were fooling, but anyway, we picked up the mission from the CIA, and a helicopter landed one day and picked me up, and I was told that I was now, well, more to that story than that. I had opportunity to meet the first commander of SOG, Colonel Clyde Russell, who was a great old soldier from 82nd Airborne Division days, and one of the early organizers and commanders of the Special Forces Group in Germany, 10th Special Forces Group. And he had a blank check for getting officers and NCOs assigned to the unit, and my name went on the blank check.
How long did you serve under SOG?
Well, that's here and there, off and on, months here and there, several months.
And this was during which tour?
I call that my second tour, because I got extended from what had been the year and then on into doing the various sundry missions. It was exciting and interesting mission, and it was very, very highly classified. Books have been written about it. I still the old soldier. When I was debriefed, I was told to keep my cotton picking mouth shut the rest of my life, and I was. And so, am I going to answer all your questions, Bobby? No, not to blow smoke around you. I mean, it's we know what SOG was doing, and sure. It was expanded to a much bigger role. And even when one of the exciting things about being in SOG was it was a work in progress, and you were putting a unit together, and there weren't any rules. There were rules, and there were a lot of rules that were broken as we did our missions. And you were given a great deal of responsibility, and you were expected to figure it out. You knew what parameters within you had to operate, and you knew that you had a mission, you had to do it. And that's when I was first introduced to Special Forces. That's when I really began to enjoy and appreciate special operations, because I didn't like to be told specifically how to do every single thing. In Special Ops, these guys, of course, they've made a great reputation for the success of Afghanistan now, particularly the Green Berets in the Army. And you're given a mission, and you're given the parameters within which you have to operate, and you're given as much administrative and logistic support as you possibly can have, but you're expected to think and operate and be as flexible as you possibly can be sometimes.
And just generally, I mean, for the viewers, where were you stationed mostly?
Okay, I spent if you take 1 month, say 4 weeks, I'd spent about a week in Saigon, I'd spend a week, 10 days sometime at our training base, which was outside, not too far from Saigon, and then I'd spend a week or 2 weeks on operations.
Okay.
And
Now
it was in Southeast Asia.
This fella Clyde that you mentioned previously, you brought a picture in, framed.
Yes, as a matter of fact.
A couple of things, including a picture of Clyde is on the far left of that.
You can barely see him in the picture, and Bob Allyn had this photograph on display at his magnificent museum that he was running, and in the photograph I have a uniform on, but we had to scrounge it at it because I did not wear a uniform. Well, I wore uniforms, but I didn't wear an American uniform. And what the picture is being awarded Vietnamese jump wings because we were parachuting in a lot of things that we did, and I was training the individuals with whom we were using to jump out of an airplane. And that was
Are you the fellow in the picture without the shoes?
No, that's another picture.
Oh,
that was with the Rangers. But in that picture are some interesting people. The gentleman in the, if you can, I think you may plan on working it into the show. The gentleman in the fatigues, the squad is Lieutenant Colonel Ito Karavori, who was from the Finnish Army, who had fought the Germans and the Russians and had come to the United States and joined the American Army, and he's been long gone now, but he was very instrumental in helping us train all Special Forces people. And then there was an NCO who was killed, I think, the next day after that picture was taken. And the picture in the photograph, the gentleman in the Vietnamese uniform, khakis, was the head of the counter, our brother arms of SOG. They called it SES. I've forgotten what it is. Strategic or something or another. And he was the commander of that. It's the only time we'd ever saw him in uniform. I didn't know. He had a fictitious name. I called him Mr. Shun, I think, or something like that. But he came out, he was a colonel in the Vietnamese Army.
Well, the jump wings did get a lot of acclaim and a lot of attention at the memorial because no one had ever seen them before.
Yeah. So. Well, there are a few folks who spent some time in Special Forces there who picked up jump wings or assignments, and not many folks have the Ranger badge and the parachute badge.
Now, your third tour in Vietnam.
Well, subsequently, after that, I went back to West Point. I taught in the physical education department for 3 years. And
we'll get into that momentarily.
I had a tour at, back in Special Forces, at 3rd Special Forces, in and out of Fort Bragg. I had several interesting missions there. And soon I was sometime in there, I was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel. And I was selected for command, and I went back to Vietnam the last time, this is in 1970, by now we're up to, as a light infantry battalion commander. And I was most fortunate as far as command is concerned, because in those days we were putting battalion commanders in for about 6 months, taking them out, taking them out. And usually if you went as lieutenant colonel and you were lucky, you got a command, and the next time, the rest of your tour, you were sitting in somewhere on a staff or sorting socks for the quartermaster or whatever they were doing.
Where were you stationed there on your third tour?
Okay, I had a light infantry battalion commander in the southwestern portion of the 4th Corps, which is Ben Phuc was the name of the place. And it was the last U.S. unit in the Mekong Delta. And so these units were standing down. I was assigned, it was a separate brigade, but I was opcon to the 25th Infantry Division out of Cu Chi.
Okay.
So I turned that battalion down, and then I was picked up for command again. So the second half, I commanded a support battalion of a separate brigade. So I had 1 year of command there, which was tremendous.
Well,
that's
and
what I did.
as coincidence would have it, if I remember correctly, you have a son, Sam, who's presently a colonel in the Army, and he served with the 25th Infantry Division in Afghanistan. Is that
That's correct. He went to command the division artillery, and ended up on some special operations assignments himself. He's a special ops gentleman, and was in the 2nd Ranger Battalion that parachuted into Panama as a young captain.
If we could just spend a couple of minutes on your post-retirement and how you got, well, to Albany, to Troy.
All right. Post-retirement, did a lot of things, a lot of different things, as a matter of fact. One year I went to a military prep school as a commandant of cadets. I was there about 2 days and realized that really wasn't what I wanted to do the rest of my life, but I missed the Army so bad, no telling what I would have done. But I ran a project in Saudi Arabia for a couple of years, came back. I have a mentally retarded son who's in a beautiful residential home in my home state of Mississippi. I spent a couple of years down there helping run that place. Then I married again, second marriage, to a young lady named Trudy Hall, and spent a lot of my life now supporting Trudy. She's in the private school business. She has done quite well. She's an undergraduate from St. Lawrence University, graduate school from Harvard, and right now she is the head of Emma Willard School in Troy, New York, and that's what brought me to Troy. I've been following Trudy around for a few years.
And that's quite the school, and if I remember correctly, the alma mater of Jane Fonda.
Yes, as a matter of fact, in my activities with veterans, I'm reminded quite frequently of the fact that Jane Fonda, and she's an interesting lady. I've had a chance to meet her, and in fact, I fixed her breakfast one morning when she was coming back and visiting her alma mater at Emma Willard.
No one's seen her since.
Anyway, she's an interesting lady. I can understand why folks still have hard feelings about Jane Fonda. But what I've done since post-retirement and what brought me here to the Troy area was that when Trudy had a chance to, she had been head of a school over in Pittsfield, Mass. We were there for 4 years and went down to Duke University. She did another graduate degree there. I spent a year in the athletic department at Duke University. It was a fantastic experience, sort of like a lot of old Army folks are there, to include their fantastic basketball coach, Mike Krzyzewski. And then we went to Memphis for a couple of years, and I got very involved there with Habitat for Humanity, and I do take the international bills. And then Trudy had a chance to become the head of Emma Willard School, and we've been here in the local area now, Bobby, for 11 years. This is the longest I've lived in one place since I was 12 years old and went away to prep school.
Well, the honor that you've, it's been instilled in you, you've had since birth, has certainly trickled down to all the veterans organizations. That
I'm asked sometimes what I do, and my standard answer is I don't do anything, and I rest when I get tired. But when you get old and ugly as I am, you do a lot of things, and you do it on your own terms. But I have involved very much in veterans affairs here. And starting out, my first experience, when I was asked to go to help support a function from Tri-County Council of Vietnam Era Veterans, which I have been privileged to be involved with that organization for some, going on 10 years now. Yeah. And it's a great bunch of guys and make one particularly great contribution to the community.
And that first venture with Tri-County Vietnam veterans was escorting the Gold Star mothers at their national convention here in Albany back then down to West Point, correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And that was, yeah. But since I've on a couple of boards, for about 6 years I drove the disabled veterans van at the hospital. I belong to a veterans organization over in Rensselaer County. Of course, I belong to the American Legion and the VFW. And it's my first experience with Veterans Affairs. I don't know where I thought my soldiers went when they left the Army. I had no philosophical reasons that after retiring I never got involved with veterans, but it was just the opportunities never came about.
Where did the Habitat for Humanity take you?
I've been to Thailand a couple times. I was in Fiji, and one of the trips I took to the deep, dark, hot, humid, mysterious Mississippi Delta. I was the only person on the team who had ever been in the South, much less Mississippi. I spent most of my time interpreting for everybody.
I was going to say, you were fluent in that language.
I was down in Clarksdale, Mississippi. It was a great experience.
Right. Might add to the televiewers, too, that you mentioned Tri-County Council of Vietnam Era Veterans. You were also one of the presidents of that organization, one of the few presidents,
Well, I think everybody sort of wanted to rest who had been the president before, and so they gave me a chance for a couple of years to be the president, and that was a great honor. A great honor.
Now, you mentioned before, Charley, that you returned to West Point in a teaching or administrative capacity, right?
First
Couple
time,
times.
first time I was instructor in the physical education department. And I was pretty senior. I was a major, and most of the instructors who go back are captains. But I was in Staff College and assigned to West Point to be a tactical officer because at that particular point in time I had a medical profile. I'd picked up something in Vietnam when I was in SOG, but it's all gone now and I'm healthy and what have you. But I managed to get over in the PE department because that's where my heart and soul was.
Okay, well, first tell the viewers what a tactical officer is and does.
Okay, tactical officers are the Corps cadets is divided into military units called companies, and each company has a tactical officer who is responsible for their military training, their discipline, moral training. It's run under the command of the commandant of cadets. And it's been an old tradition at the military academy ever since I suppose the place was founded in 1802 that the units have tactical officers. They're usually company grade, sometime majors, depends on where we are at that particular point in time. I knew where my heart and soul was, what I enjoyed doing at West Point, and besides not doing too well in academics, I beat the system too sometime. I'm not sure I was the guy who should be telling cadets how to run their business. Anyway, yeah. I enjoy it. But I had a second tour. I went back as a full colonel. Normally you don't get two tours of duty. I went, there was certain circumstances developed that in the intercollegiate athletic department, which at West Point is a separate department from the physical education department. I was asked to go back and take over as the deputy athletic director, and very shortly after I arrived, the athletic director had to retire for medical reasons, so I served my alma mater as the director of intercollegiate athletics for a number of years.
And when was that?
1979 to 1981.
Okay.
Well,
now, we mentioned a couple times your son Sam, who's a colonel in the Army at the present time, West Pointer?
Sam is class of '82, West Point. He's had 2 tours at West Point also. His first tour was in the physical education department. And then he was assigned some 2 years ago as the deputy commandant, was moved over shortly after that to the deputy intercollegiate athletic director, which is a job I had, and then athletic director left on them, and Sam is right now serving as the interim athletic director at West Point. He's a tremendous athlete. He was a nationally ranked triathlete. He was a lacrosse player at West Point. He's had a very fine military career. He's been a brigade commander. He's a battalion commander. He was in the Ranger Battalion. He parachuted into Panama as a captain. I like him. I love him. I have a great amount of respect for him. He's 10 times the soldier his dad ever was, and a hell of a lot better father, that's for sure.
There you go. We do have a picture of Sam with the superintendent at West Point, a recent picture, which is our viewers will get a chance to see probably, which is in the Tri-County Vietnam Veterans newsletter. And what's that picture about?
The photograph was taken at halftime during the past Army-Navy football game in Philadelphia. And Sam is in the photograph holding a plaque with the superintendent on the other side. The Army had just been invited to participate in the bowl out in Texas, in Dallas. They played SMU, and I might add that they did quite well.
They did quite well.
They did quite well.
he looked very smart, as you did when you were the Grand Marshal in the Albany
That's right.
parade.
Sam has had a presence here in Albany. Some 3 or 4 years ago now, I was honored by being selected to be the Grand Marshal for the Armed Forces Day Parade, and my aide for the day was my son, Sam.
Well, Veterans Day Parade.
Veterans Day Parade, that's right. And, well, my goodness, I'm showing my age there. And the lady, great photograph, this lady marching with us was a Gold Star mother that I exercised one of the privileges I had to be the Grand Marshal and ask her to walk with us that day.
This would be whom?
Was it Charley?
Charlene?
Charlene
Robbins,
who had lost her son in the early days of the Iraqi War.
Right, and that would be Thomas Robbins from Bethlehem, New York.
Yes.
And she's a wonderful lady.
She is, and as a matter of fact, she's the present chaplain of Tri-County Council of
That's
Vietnam
correct.
Era Veterans, and as we all know, any veterans function in the capital region, or at least in this county, Charlene is the person they ask to do an invocation or a benediction or a prayer for
That's
peace.
correct.
Right?
And
She's
she's
quite the lady.
Very much a presence in the local area.
And just for point of clarification, would you tell our viewers, please, what a Gold Star Mother is?
Tradition that was begun shortly after World War I, kind of died out and came back into being in World War II. And at that particular point in time, if you had a member of your family or your household who was serving in the armed forces, you could be issued a small rectangular flag, red, white, and blue, with a blue star in it for each individual from that household. And if you had more than one individual, there was two,
That
three.
was serving.
That was serving.
Serving.
Yes.
And then if that individual paid a supreme sacrifice, that blue star turned to a gold star. And the tradition nearly died out after World War II. We kicked it back in during the Vietnam War. And right now we're pushing hard, make sure that's very much part of our culture today. I always love to explain what the blue stars and the gold stars mean. And Chaplain Charlene had lost her son in the early days and became a Gold Star mother. And that it's a national organization of mothers of soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen who paid the supreme sacrifice. And you have a state organization and a local organization. And they're great ladies. And Tri-County Council of Vietnam Era Veterans has pretty much adopted all the Gold Star mothers quite a number of years ago. We call them our moms.
Right.
And
That's true.
That's the top of one of our missions, our many missions, but to the top of it.
Cornerstone, yes, it is.
Well,
In fact, I have one quick war story. In World War II, I became very familiar as a little old country boy. Right down the gravel road in front of my house, the McKibbing family, shortly after World War II began, 3 blue stars appeared in their window. Invasion of North Africa, 1 star turned to gold. And then they lost another son in the Pacific, and about 3 days after the Battle of the Bulge in December of 1944, the 3rd Gold Star went up in that window.
that's tragic.
Yeah.
Now, Charlie, we have a couple minutes left, and we promised our viewers that we might discuss, or you might tell them a little bit about this close call you had as a master parachuter way back then.
Okay.
And would you fill us in and entertain us with?
Well,
I guess it's not an entertaining thing, but I guess we can say that now after all these years.
It was rather entertaining, I guess, for the folks that are watching the guy clobber in. All right, but not too much technical background. As a master parachutist, of course, I had many jumps. By then, I'd been a jump master. That's the gentleman who commands the airplane to get the paratroopers stood up and out the door. Sometime you let NCOs do it. I was a commander. I always insisted I was a jump master in my airplane. We were going on a big tactical training exercise at Fort Bragg one day in November of 1962. And we got down to the aircraft, and a loadmaster of the Air Force came up to me and said, "Sir," says,
He's an Air Force guy,
he's
right?
the Air Force guy. It's the guy that takes care of.
I just thought I'd bring that up for Bob's benefit.
The cargo area, yes.
And he had a couple of ladders in the that shouldn't have been there, and he asked me, could he keep them there? And I didn't pay much attention to it. I said, "Oh yeah, we can get around that." Then the whole situation exacerbated, but we had been issued a new piece of equipment, and it had been tested. But it was called an H harness. And the idea was that you could take your kit bag, which is the bag that you put underneath your quick release, that you rolled your parachute up and put into it after you hit the ground. And you could take this kit bag and put other equipment in it and hook it underneath your reserve. But the idea was because when an airborne unit lands, they're very vulnerable to tanks, and you have no tank protection. So you put out lots of landmines. And so the idea was that every trooper could hear another landmine in. Well, we didn't get a chance to train on this thing much, and so I issued them all my troops. And of course, they put apples and oranges and extra things to carry, and every squad leader wanted to take something extra. And so we got down to the aircraft, and everybody had this H harness underneath their kit bag. It looks like they had what we called on their reserve, looked like it was a kit bag. So too late for me to change that. So I had a loaded aircraft. Every man with his H harness. When I stood them up, took me ever to get them all up. Then they were trying to get to the door, walking around the ladder that I'd told the loadmaster no sweat, and I was getting them out the door slowly, 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 and I looked out the window, and we were running out of drop zone. And they wanted me away in Haiti, so I was going to leave my troops on the ground and go back to land and to the Air Force and get in a Jeep and drive out to the. So I dived out the door.
You're the last person out.
The last person out, and I dived because underneath me was really trees I was about to come up on. And by not taking a proper body position, I dived out and had lots of twist. And so first you count to 4, I had the opening shock, and I looked up to see if my parachute had opened, which is the next thing you do. Well, I couldn't get my head up because it was so many twists, but I could see the edge of the parachute. So, it opened. So I quit looking for that, reached down in my pocket of my trousers to bring out my map, to start looking, and I realized I was falling much faster than everybody else was. What had happened, when you don't have a proper body position, many times one of the suspension lines will loop over the pod, your parachute, and it will become, you have 2 pods at that particular point in time. And it was called a Mae West.
The canopy.
The canopy,
right.
Thank you, sir. It was called a Mae West.
And that's because
there was some lady at one time at, depends on the audience who knows who Mae West was, who's
Dolly Parton.
Well,
Okay.
so the parachute looks like a huge bra with
right,
one riser over it.
and which means you're falling at a great acceleration. Well, my position was so bad that 2 suspension lines, I had a double Mae West, which I had 4 little tiny bitty pods, which means I was falling fast. And normally you have a terrible, if you don't get killed, you have terrible injuries. I took a proper body position. I clobbered in. General Linville was grading the exercise. He sent his aide over to get the name of the body, and the medics came out, and I was standing there dusting myself off when they arrived. But
the ambulance came out to pick up the remains, right?
Absolutely, and it was not quite that blasé because I bruised every fiber in my body. My earlobes were bruised, and if I stopped walking, if I quit moving, I lasted for about until the next morning, through the night to the exercise, and I had to go in because I just couldn't move. But I was so fortunate, so very, very fortunate.
You didn't break a thing?
Didn't break a thing.
Well,
but I was bruised. I tell you what, pal, I was bruised. And I, again, when I talked after something, I said, okay, here's, I said, do you, stupid mistakes, mistake. After I should have told the loadmaster to get I should have gotten my troops to school better on using the H harness. I shouldn't have died. On and on and on. It was my fault right down the line.
Colonel Johnson, I appreciate your being with us today. Thank you very much. I hope you had a good time. We certainly did. I hope our viewers had a good time as well. Listen to one of our premier veterans in this capital region. And again, thank you very much. Any final words, Bob?
No, just sir, it's been an honor. Always, you know.
We're far enough. I'll give you a salute.
Okay. And thank you, Larry. It was a privilege to be here.